Welcome to another episode at Empower Apps. I'm your host, Leo Dion. Today, I'm joined by Jared Sorge. Hey, Jared, how's it going?
It's going pretty well. How are you, Leo?
Good. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm really excited to have a fellow podcaster. Jared, you host the Xcoders podcast. What else do you do right now?
My day job is at Zulily. I'm in the Seattle area, and that's where Zulily is based. Zulily is an online retailer, and I'm an iOS engineer on what they call the core site and apps squad, which is basically an infrastructure team that sits below all of our feature teams to help them get their jobs done more efficiently. And I get to work on fun stuff like tooling and architecture and automation and a lot of cool stuff like that.
So we were chatting previously because you had a recent speaker that was also a guest, Malin, on talking about her experience with Swift UI. And then we got started talking about automation. I was like, ooh, automation. That's my thing. And we've had guests on the show like talk about continuous integration, things like that. But some of the stuff with we'll talk about today. I think we're both really passionate about we're all developers are kind of interested in automation at some point, right? But what do you think automation helps with when it comes to like your typical iOS development team?
I think it can help you in your day-to-day workflow. Like one example is that before Zulily, I worked at Lyft, and on the first day at Lyft, they told me that they don't check in Xcode projects, and that blew my mind. And what they did was they used a tool to generate those Xcode projects from manifest files. And that enabled a lot of flexibility in how you built the project. One thing that I've come to really like about this method is when you go and add a new target in Xcode itself, there's a lot of extra files, and it's set up the way Xcode wants it to be set up, not the way that necessarily makes sense for your project. And adding some tooling on top of Xcode to suit the needs of your team or your project really can make development go faster. I implemented this actually at Zulily a couple months ago, where we are now generating our project programmatically. And the amount of merge conflicts that we have is basically none, because the project file would be the big source of churn. And we'd have developers spending hours debugging merge conflicts between where was the main branch and their feature branch. And that just goes away. So this automation and tooling can really help reduce the amount of friction in the workflows of our developers. And that's a lot of fun to see.
Yeah, Xcode projects are probably, besides storyboards, the biggest merge conflict issue folks deal with. So what tooling did they use for generating that based on a manifest?
At Lyft, I was introduced to Xcodegen, and I still use that on some of my personal projects. But at Zulily, I actually went with Tuist, it's a slightly different philosophy than Xcodegen. Actually, it's quite a bit different if I'm being honest, because these Tuist manifests are all done in Swift, so it's much more akin to defining a Swift package manifest like you do in Swift Package Manager. But they give you a module that you can fill out your own helper functions and methods, so you can add a lot of niceties to your interfaces for how you actually create. They call them micro features. We're using the term modules, but it gives us the ability to really define and narrow down how these things are created to make it a lot easier for our developers.
So Xcodegen is typically YAML based, right?
Yeah, YAML or JSON.
And I'm more familiar with Xcodegen, and actually one of the current clients I'm using, they're using Tuist. How would you decide, it sounds like in your personal projects, you're using Xcodegen. How do you come to that decision that, in this case, Xcodegen is good, but in this case, Tuist might be better?
The big thing for us at Zulily that at least led me down the Tuist path was support for test plans. We had implemented test plans in our iOS project probably a couple months prior, and Xcodegen, at least when we were looking at it, didn't yet support test plans, and I didn't want to just abandon them to do project generation. But Tuist does support them, and they support them really well. So that was the main thing that led me down that path. And then as I started learning more about Tuist and some of its extra features, it has stuff like building new modules or micro features right in, so you can define your own templates. I think they call them stencils.
Okay.
But it makes that super easy, and stuff that at Lyft was previously bolted on as extra tooling, is kind of built into Tuist, which is really nice. They also have a feature called Focus, which I don't know if Lyft made that as part of Bazel or if it's part of Bazel that Lyft adopted. But the idea is that you would make your project focused on one or n number of modules, and the tooling would put together a project that has just those in the project and pre-compile everything down below. So you're focused really just on the stuff that you care about, and everything else builds super fast. And it's really nice.
That's awesome. Yeah, because I think that's one of the things when you get to a larger company where being able to get faster builds like that are, make it a lot easier. Hey folks, I want to let you know about Swift Heroes Digital 2021, happening this year, Friday, April 16th. Swift Heroes Digital is a one-day event for developers, designers, and project managers at all levels of experience with the Swift platform. This year, not only will I be speaking on Swift packages, dependency management of the future, but previous guests like Donnie Walls will be talking about core data, as well as Vincent Perdey will be talking more about async await. You'll definitely want to check this conference out. For listeners of the show, you can use the special discount code in the show notes to get 20% off your ticket. That's right. Use the discount code in the show notes to get 20% off your Swift Heroes ticket for Swift Heroes Digital 2021. These tickets not only include on-the-day live presentations, but continued on-demand access after the event. So if there's any questions you have about any of the talks, you'll definitely want to get a ticket so you can ask those questions live for the presenters. Check out the agenda at swiftheroes.com to see the schedule and learn more about what events and talks are going on. Again, use the discount code to get 20% off your Swift Heroes ticket. Thank you, Swift Heroes, for inviting me to speak at this exciting event, and I'm looking forward to talking as well as listening to the other speakers at Swift Heroes Digital 2021. So we talked kind of about the front end, just not the front end, but the beginning part of creating that Xcode project. How about when it comes to like testing, what tools do you use to automate that?
Well, I mentioned we use test plans, and that kind of stitches together different scenarios. Like we have our pre-merge request test plan that we run before we create our merge request, run GitLab. So it's all merge requests, not pull requests. And you can set up different scenarios that way. As far as other automation pieces that we have, we do use Fastlane for making new builds, for making betas and submitting to the App Store and that kind of thing. We use for continuous integration, we have Jenkins set up, which I'm still learning about and isn't my favorite. I think we're going to be pivoting to GitLab CI here in the next month or so. That's a project I get to take on. Those are like the main things that we use for automation at Zulily.
Yeah, I've known Fastlane for years since I was an iOS developer and first starting out, but I was actually able to use it with the recent release of Hartwich because they just supported independent watch apps now, and hooking that up to GitLab CI, and it was like so awesome to be able to like just automate that part of posting it to the App Store without having to deal with like all sorts of manual issues that can come up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all of our stuff is stitched together like in Makefiles. So we have a Makefile that has all of our commands that we want to run. So it's like make release that will run the Fastlane stuff. And in Jenkins, I've taken the time to actually extract out like the big long scripts that we might have had set up before and have that be really one make command. So that way we can run them locally on our machines and have the same environment locally on development as in our CI environment. Plus, eventually, when we do get away from Jenkins, we can move something to something else, and it's really simple to recreate those commands in whatever manifests GitLab CI will use.
Have you started working with GitLab CI?
Not yet, no.
Okay.
How was your experience with it, Ben?
Yeah, so I really like it, and I think it was first Travis, but Travis has had its issues recently. I don't know if you've used Travis, but I do a lot of stuff with Swift Package Manager, and like Bitrise and Circle CI isn't really a good fit for that as far as where I'm at. So then I tend to use GitHub Actions quite a bit because it's free. It works on open source public repos, and it worked great. But then I had some private projects, and then that's where GitLab CI just worked perfectly. And what I really like about it is, I just bought a brand new MacBook Air, M1 MacBook Air. And so now I could take my old MacBook Pro and hook that up to GitLab CI. and run it on there, and it's free basically. So now I have my own little CI machine I could use to publish apps. And yeah, it's really, really powerful. GitLab, I can totally see why a lot of companies have moved a lot of their code over to GitLab because it's just so powerful.
Yeah. You could do something similar with GitHub as well. I know there's the Actions runner that you can put on a Mac and hook that up to GitHub. I've started down that process a little bit, but every time I start doing something like that on the side, I find that I get distracted from the thing I'm actually trying to do. So I'm like, no, I get to keep focused on like the app I'm trying to ship as opposed to the tooling that sounds like a lot of fun to build up around it. Otherwise, I'll never ship anything.
Yeah. Well, that brings up a really good point, because I think like if there's anything us developers can run into is like over automating everything. And like, how do you draw that line? Are you like, okay, like I need to be careful because I'm trying to spend way too much time automating this, and I'm spending hours automating it for something that honestly manually would only take me like a few minutes to do every so often.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I don't realize up front. It's only after I've spent a bunch of time into something that I'm like, should I really be doing this in the first place? And one example that recently comes to mind on a side project that I'm working on a new app that's Mac and iOS, and I want to distribute betas. For iOS, we have TestFlight. TestFlight's awesome. It's so good. On the Mac, we have nothing. We have to roll it all ourselves or like find some other like distribution method, right? And so like I went to go and integrate Sparkle in my app.
Yes, I've used Sparkle before.
Yeah. And Sparkle's really cool, but V1 only works with non-sandboxed apps, and my app was sandboxed. So I had to like go.
Okay.
So and V2 has no actual official distribution yet. You like have to build it from source as far as I could tell. And so like trying to get through the process of automating, not just building a whole other variant signed by a developer ID through Fastlane, and then the notarizing process, like automating all of that is kind of a pain. I'm hoping like every year we say this and it doesn't happen. It still gets increasingly close to TestFlight for the Mac. Like my end goal is to dump that entire part of my code base and just use TestFlight for the Mac when that comes out. So, probably like 4 or 5 hours into this, I'm like, I should really, instead of trying to automate everything, automate the stuff that makes sense. Like give me the code signing keys through Fastlane so that I can do match and all that good stuff. But I'll actually just make the build in Xcode like a savage and upload and do everything just the Xcode way, because that's actually just going to get me the app that I need at the end of the day.
Right. So I use an app, Ulysses. I don't know if you're familiar with it, for writing, and they have a beta, and they were using Microsoft App Center to distribute.
Oh, interesting.
macOS beta. And there's a Fastlane plugin for App Center, so that might be worth. Sorry, now you might like suck a lot of time into this after this recording, but that might be something to look into, because that's what they use to distribute their beta, was App Center.
That's cool. Okay.
But yeah, do you think that they're going to come out with TestFlight for macOS? It's not. What do you think the technical challenge would be for that?
I mean, they have all the pieces in place. There's nothing that they don't have. I think that they need to build. I think they just need to have the want to. And I think we've seen a lack of investment in the Mac App Store on the whole, like compared to the iOS App Store. It seems like every year there's some big new advancements in the iOS App Store, and the Mac App Store might get a new coat of paint every now and then.
Do you think, I might go so far as to disagree, because I think the Mac App Store is pretty cool. Like, there's a lot there. It's just, I forget about it. Like, I don't think it's a matter of effort. Like, I just think like, oh, right. Like, there's a Mac App Store. I think I've used it more and more, especially with my M1, because I want to make sure that I use stuff in the App Store. But like, they have articles, they have like a lot of stuff. Whereas honestly, like the iOS App Store, I barely use that. Honestly, like it's become really hard to find stuff on there.
Yeah, it's hard to find stuff on the Mac App Store though too. Like the example I heard the other day on a podcast was someone said that they were searching for Excel and they got an app that has Excel's icon, but it's just like a bunch of templates or something that they paid $10 for. They thought they were getting Excel, but they didn't get Excel. So like stuff like that is not great. There's also a lot of big apps that just can't be in the App Store. Part of that's like the sandboxing rule and that kind of thing. And I get it to a certain extent, but I think the visibility and you don't think about it, that's on Apple. That's like, it seems like a sign of a lack of investment in it because the apps that you want aren't always in there. And so you're more willing to go to their website because it's still kind of the default as a Mac user. If you wanted to go find a new app or download something, you go to the website of the app developer and you might buy it there. They might direct you to the App Store because it's only going to be there. But on the whole, I think the Mac App Store does leave something to be desired for sure. But like to get back to the TestFlight question, I don't know that there's any missing pieces there. They just need to want to do it. I hope that the merging is not the right word, but the unification of the platform architectures, now that we've got Apple Silicon and iOS apps running on the Mac, I hope people are going to start expecting TestFlight betas on the Mac for their iOS apps, for instance, and that can just like be a carryover and lead into Mac TestFlight proper. That's my hope.
Yeah, agreed.
So I'm excited for WWDC. We'll see what they come up with, but that's definitely on my wish list.
So I wanted to talk a little bit more about other forms of automation you might use. Yeah, we talked about Fastlane and Xcodegen. What did you want to talk about next?
Those are the main couple things that I use on a day-to-day. I did mention, you know what's really cool that I've really been liking is Swift Package Manager and making Swift command line tools with ArgumentParser. Have you used Swift ArgumentParser before?
Yeah, agreed.
So good.
Hey folks, I wanted to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by AppFigures. Did you know that better ratings have a direct impact on improving your app's visibility and on driving downloads? Stronger ratings signal that an app has happy users. While there are other factors, app stores tend to float these results higher in search results. As more users find your app, they are also far more likely to download it when they see social proof. Learn when to ask for ratings, as well as other tips and best practices by signing up for AppFigures' weekly newsletter at appfigures.com/newsletter. If you like what you see, head to appfigures.com to try AppFigures for free. Listeners of the show can get 30% off for the next 3 months. That's for both new and existing users, using the code EMPOWER3030. Again, if you like what you see, both new and existing users can use our special code EMPOWER3030 to get 30% off for the next 3 months. If you're an app developer and you want to reach that audience, you'll definitely want to check AppFigures out. Thank you, AppFigures, for sponsoring this show. So like we said, you have your own podcast, Xcoders, and I'm going to be on there in your next episode, and we're going to talk a little bit more about automation and how much I like Swift Package Manager. But it sounds like you're doing some stuff with automation in Swift Package Manager and using the ArgumentParser package, which I talked about last year in one of my talks. What have you found really powerful with it?
It makes building command line apps super easy. And if I combine that with another package called ShellOut by John Sundell, then I can use that to glue together shell scripts essentially and build shell scripts without having to write bash. And bash sucks. It's super hard to work with. And so like that feels like it gives me superpowers in some ways because I can integrate everything I know about Swift and how to work with Swift on my day-to-day basis. And I get all the power from bash scripts and using the shell to do whatever it is that I need to do. It's really, really good.
Yeah, I've used ShellOut quite a bit by John. And like you said, it's a lot of like environment variables and things you don't have access to if you're going to run through process or process info. And like he's made that a lot easier. Like I said, I did a talk last year on ArgumentParser, and it's one of my favorite automated like tools out there. What it does is it brings things like Codable and some of the new stuff with property wrappers in SwiftUI over to the command line. And it just makes it a lot easier to really build like robust command line interfaces.
Yeah, you just build out your struct that is a command and implement run. It just works. And if you give it the wrong arguments, it prints out a super helpful help description of here's how you actually use this thing. Like it gives you everything you need to make a really amazing command line tool. Have you used it with Swift SH before?
No, because I think I just don't use Swift SH as much as I used to now that we can build executables pretty easily.
Yeah, I get that.
I went down the path of using Swift SH when I was helping Dave Erwer with some Swift package validation for Swift package index.
Mm-hmm.
And then I ended up saying, screw this, I'm just going to build an executable. And I think it was a tool of its time, but I think now it's just so much easier to just write an executable and compile it, I guess, or even just run Swift run.
Well, Swift SH does that, but just under the covers, right? It still gives you the executable. It still gives you the Swift package at the end of the day, but all you have to check in is your one file, not as opposed to the entire structure of a package. So if you just want one script,
that makes total sense, because I think if you have something fairly simple and you can just put it all in one file, then it makes total sense.
Yeah, totally. If it's going to get bigger and merit multiple files, then absolutely make a package out of it. But if you just want one script file, then it works really well, and it works really well with ArgumentParser.
Yeah.
It's super good.
Yeah, totally. And I think that was the situation I ran into, is my file was getting a bit long.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why it's got the helpful eject command, because you can eject your script into a package, and it'll just give you where you used to have one Swift file, it'll give you the folder of your Swift package with a proper manifest and everything.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's a really powerful tool. I highly recommend people check it out. What other tools have you used when it comes to automation?
I think the big thing that I've used, like I mentioned before, is Makefiles. And Makefiles are this kind of product of the older era and older generation to do build systems. And all of my commands start with phony at the top. This is another trick I learned at Lyft. But you can use these commands where you do type make, and then they call them rules, make and then some rule, and then a colon, and then you just got a little script you can embed in line to call other scripts, to call other tools, and everything after the colon on the same line are other rules that make will invoke before actually calling your script. So for instance, to make our project through Tuist at Zulily, we have a command called make project. And that will then ensure that stuff like Tuist is installed and configured properly. We have a follow-up script that's written in Swift SH. So I make sure that Swift SH is installed and configured. And that way, once you get to the where you're generating your project and running your cleanup script, everything is already done for you. You can chain those commands together to make some really powerful automations, and it's really nice.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks think Makefiles are just for your C or C++ project, but it's really about managing 100 dependencies.
Yeah.
And running the commands in the correct order. That's the way I see it. And I'm in the same boat where I've found myself kind of what would be really good is a Makefile, because then I don't have to manage all these dependencies and things like that. So yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I can't tell. So I know that Ruby has Rake, which is their Ruby equivalent of Make, I think. Mm-hmm. And that probably has less of the this is for C folks kind of stigma than Makefiles do. I've kind of wanted to make one in Swift that I would call Sake, because add the substitute the S for the M for the S, and there you go.
Gotcha.
And then you have your Sake file. It's I've got the branding all there. I just haven't actually written the thing yet.
It's so funny you're talking about branding. I feel like that's almost the funnest part, is trying to come up with names for some of these projects. It's okay, is the domain available? What has to do with Swift? Yeah, I'll replace the M with S. Yeah. Well, what's the other project I was working on? Sodo was the same story. They replaced Bodo, I think was either the Go or the Ruby thing for AWS. And they replaced it with an S for Sodo for Swift. And I was oh, yeah, that makes sense.
I didn't know that was the origin of that.
Yeah. We talked about it in a previous episode, and luckily Adam followed up and let me know on Twitter. So one of the big challenges with automation, it kind of gets to cost. I've obviously found a way around it by using my old Mac, but to do a lot of this stuff, you need macOS.
Yeah.
How do you get around that? I guess, do you just find your own Mac? Have you ever worked with something like Mac Stadium, or what have you seen as some of the big challenges with requiring macOS essentially?
Yeah, I would love to work with Mac Stadium or some co-located Mac host someday. I know Amazon has rolled out their Macs in AWS that are really expensive, but it's a good option for like bare metal, especially if you've already got AWS in your organization.
Right.
At Zulily, we host 2 Mac Minis at the moment. One's a 2014 that runs our Jenkins server, and one's a 2018 that's our runner. And another one of the automation projects I have ahead of me is to make some Ansible playbooks so that we can have the Mac, the runner configured as we want to, and then expand that fleet to add a couple more.
Take a step back, because I don't know what that means. What's Ansible?
Oh, Ansible, there are tools like that. Another one I've heard of is Chef.
Yep.
I haven't used either one full disclosure, so I don't know how this is all going to play out. But the idea is that you can have one central repository that defines like what macOS version are you running, what Xcode version are you running, what's your environment overall configured, and then apply that to a fleet of machines.
Gotcha.
So as Xcode 12.5 beta next rolls out, we could add that to our Ansible playbook, roll it out to our Mac Minis, and it will download, unzip, and move Xcode beta into the proper place automatically.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting that done. But we host those Mac Minis in our building at Zulily. Personally, while I'm setting things up in my environment, like with Fastlane to do automation, and I've got another Mac Mini at home that can do some of that continuous integration kind of work, I haven't gone through the actual process of saying, I'm going to set up like when I push to main, my Mac Mini will make a new build and push it to TestFlight automatically. Like I haven't gotten that part wired up yet. But the plumbing is largely in place once I do get to the point where I can invest that time.
Yeah. One of the powerful things I've found is using Fastlane Match to manage the certificates. And like that was a big help. But yeah, like with a lot of these things with GitLab runner, it's just not super easy to get set up on macOS. And also you run into the issue of like you can't do like Docker.
Mm-hmm.
I did find like a Docker OS X project I want to play around with when I have spare time, whenever that happens. I'll provide the link to the show notes.
How does that work?
Yeah, I'd be really curious about that, because what I've found is, as somebody who builds Mac apps, is I don't have the ability to reset simulator. And if you know what I mean, I can't just go like, oh, like here, Xcode, try this out on Catalina. Here, try this out on Big Sur. Whereas with iOS, we just have this nice ability of just like getting any model iPhone and just testing it out.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and that's one of the biggest challenges with macOS development, is not having that ability to test different environments.
Yeah, I guess that's where I'm at this point somewhat fortunate in that like my Mac app is brand new. And so I'm just building it against Big Sur, and I don't have to worry about backwards compatibility yet.
Oh, I'm in the same boat. Yeah, like that's what I'm doing. I'm doing like SwiftUI documents. So like, yeah, sorry, it's only going to work on Big Sur. Deal with it.
Yeah, I don't know what the alternative for like supporting old Mac versions is beyond either somehow automate like VMware virtualized instances, which is going to be super slow because macOS has never been virtualized well.
Right.
Or just keep find old machines on eBay or Craigslist or whatever, and just keep old Macs with old versions.
Yep, that's exactly what it is. Yeah. I mean, if you're that serious about supporting old versions, you probably could spend the money on it.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, there's no easy way to do it. Maybe, who knows? Maybe like with the M1s, they can make that easier. I don't know. Not with like Catalina, but at least like Big Sur going forward. Maybe they can be like, oh yeah, we can run a virtual Mac OS environment for Big Sur, in 5 years or something like that. Because you essentially can run like an iPhone app, so I'd assume it's like kind of the same idea. Like, I don't know.
I mean, you're still needing to virtualize older versions of Mac OS. And they did add the hypervisor framework fairly recently.
Yes.
So maybe that could unlock something there as well. I don't know. Then there's the licensing thing.
Yeah.
Apple doesn't want to license macOS for running in lots of different environments like that. So maybe this is another like pie in the sky thing, but that is something that comes of the BuddyBuild acquisition, which BuddyBuild's getting shut down as a CI provider pretty soon. And I think there's some hope that those
mean something in a few months.
Yeah, exactly. That those flowers will die, and the seeds that remain will flower their new Apple CI system, which would be pretty cool to see what they come up with.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of like that workflow ideal, right?
Yeah.
It becomes shortcuts, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Jared, I want to continue this conversation, but I think you want to ask me some more questions about Swift Package Manager and
sure
tool
do.
automation and server side stuff. Okay. So where can people find your podcast?
Yeah, I run the Xcoders community podcast. You can find that at xcoders.org. And that's representing the Seattle, Redmond, and Vancouver Xcoder developer groups.
Cool. So we'll post a link to this next part of the episode on Xcoders in the show notes below. Thank you so much, Jared, for coming on. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at jsorge. My website is jsorge.net.
Awesome. So people can look in the show notes if they want to hear the rest of this conversation on Xcoders. I'm going to be talking more about Vapor, server-side development automation, Swift Package Manager, and tool automation, things like that. So you definitely want to check that next part in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. If you really enjoyed it, love for you to take some time and post a review to Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, or Amazon. People can find me on Twitter at LeoGD. My company is Bright Digit. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode, and I look forward to listening to the next part of this conversation on Xcoders.
Thanks, Leo.
Thank you.